Kansas Territory, October 1871. The wind had a bite that morning, the kind that whispered of early snow. When Zachara Coyle knelt in the dirt behind a stranger's stable, pulling dried husks from the hard-packed ground. Her fingers were cracked and raw, but she kept her head down, eyes on the scattered corn the horses had not trampled. Beside her, her little boy, Orion, picked through the straw with small, eager hands. "Mama, this one's still yellow." She reached out, brushing a clump of his dark hair from his forehead. "That one's good, sweetheart. Put it in the sack." They had no permission to be there, only desperation. The barn stood behind a long, weathered house at the edge of the prairie, a day's walk east of Dodge City. The place looked lived in but quiet. Zachara had seen no one when she crept up before dawn, just a few horses in the corral and smoke curling from the chimney. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. Orion had chewed a strip of bark from a birch tree. Her boots were splitting at the seams. She had no plan beyond getting through this day. A door slammed. She froze, one hand still on the half-filled sack. Orion's eyes went wide, and he slid behind her, clutching her coat. Boots crunched over frostbitten grass. "You trying to feed a horse or starve one?" A man's voice called out. It was low, steady, not angry. Curious. Zachara rose slowly, her back stiff. Her coat hung off her frame. "I was not stealing, just picking up what they dropped." He stood in the morning light with his hands at his sides. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with a rough brown coat and a face that looked like it had known both kindness and war. His hair was thick and black, his beard trimmed close. His eyes were steady, the color of ash bark. "You live nearby?" he asked. "No," she said, lifting her chin. "We do not live anywhere." He looked at the boy. Orion clung to her skirt, but met the man's eyes. "I'm not the law," he said. "Name's Varen Ridge. This is my land." Zachara hesitated. "Zachara Coyle. My son is Orion." Varen nodded. "Well, Zachara Coyle, I do not mind you taking what my horses missed. But if you are out here with a child in this cold, you need more than leftover corn." She said nothing. "You got family nearby?" "No." He looked at her another moment, then turned toward the house. "Come in. There's coffee on the stove." She did not move. He paused. "You can stand there freezing, or you can come warm your boy up. Your choice." They followed him. Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee and cedar smoke. It was clean, simple wood table, iron stove, a cot pushed against the wall. Varen poured 2 mugs and set one in front of her. She stared at it. "I do not have anything to trade." "You do not have to," he said. "You look like you could use a place to sit down." Orion climbed onto the bench beside her. Varen handed him a warm biscuit without a word. The boy devoured it. Zachara wrapped her hands around the mug. "Thank you." He shrugged. "You got anyone looking for you?" She shook her head. "My husband died last winter. We were living near Wichita. He went out to cut wood and fell through the ice. By the time someone found him, it was too late." Varen nodded once. "How long you been on the road?" "Since spring. I try to find work. Sewing. Cleaning." "Nobody wants a woman with a child." "Not nobody," he said. They stayed through the morning. Varen showed Orion the chickens, let him feed the horses. By midday, he had brought out a trunk from the back room with a few pieces of clothing left behind by his sister, who had moved east 2 years ago. He gave Zachara a wool skirt, a shawl, and a pair of boots that almost fit. "You can stay in the loft tonight," he said as the sun dipped low. "It gets cold, but I will bring up extra quilts." Zachara hesitated. "You do not know us." "I do not have to," he said. "I know enough." That night, tucked in the hayloft under thick quilts, Zachara stared at the wooden beams overhead while Orion slept beside her. "You think he is kind?" the boy mumbled. "I think he is," she whispered. "For now, we will be safe." The next morning, she rose early and started chopping kindling before Varen came out. He watched her from the barn door, arms crossed. "You do not have to earn your keep." "I want to." He nodded once, then handed her a bundle of eggs and flour. "Make breakfast." She did. That day turned into another, then a week. She helped with the animals, mended torn shirts, baked bread. Orion ran free, laughing more than he had in months. 2 weeks later, Varen came back from town with a bolt of white fabric in his saddlebag. "I saw this and thought of you," he said, setting it on the table. Zachara touched it with careful fingers. "What is it?" "A wedding dress," he said simply. "If you want it." She looked up, her breath caught in her chest. He stepped closer. I know this is fast, but I have not seen someone carry so much and still smile at their boy. I have not met anyone like you. Her voice was quiet. And I have not met anyone who gave us a home when we had nothing. He reached for her hand. I want you to stay, not just for the season. For good. Zachara looked at Orion, who was drawing pictures in the dust by the fire. Then she looked back at Varen. Yes, she whispered. He smiled. I will build you a real room. Not the loft. I want this to be your home too. She stepped closer, eyes full of tears. You already made it one. The first frost stayed on the ground until noon. Orion pressed his nose to the window, watching the horses in the pasture, their breaths soft clouds in the still air. Zachara stood at the table, fingers busy with the raw wool Varen had brought down from the loft. She had carded half of it and was spinning slow, even thread onto the spindle. Her hands had steadied since arriving, skin still rough, but no longer bleeding. Varen stepped in from the porch, brushing straw from his sleeves. I saw a fox nosing around the coop this morning. She glanced up. Any hens hurt? Not yet. I'll set traps tonight. He crossed the room and set a small wrapped bundle beside her work. Inside were dried apple slices, soft and golden. I bartered for them off a peddler headed east, he said. Figured you hadn't tasted fruit in a while. You figured right, she murmured, offering one to Orion, who took it with both hands. Varen didn't sit. His eyes drifted to the fabric she'd sewn into the beginnings of a dress, folded neatly on the shelf above the hearth. I'll ride out to the platform tomorrow, he said. Caleb's got a preacher brother staying with him till next week. Zachara didn't answer right away. Her hands had stilled over the spindle. He waited. Do you want it to be a church wedding? She asked finally. I want it to be whatever feels right to you. She looked at him then, her expression different than before, something quieter, not uncertain, but weighty, as though she were measuring the ground beneath her feet. I haven't stood in front of anyone since the last time I buried something. You won't be alone, he said. Orion climbed onto her lap without a word. She wrapped her arms around him and kissed the top of his head. I'd like it to be just us, she said. You, me, and him. That's enough church. Varen's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then we'll ask Caleb's brother to come here. That afternoon, Varen took Orion to help mend the western fence. Zachara stayed inside, laying out the dress fabric across the bed, marking the hem with chalk. When they returned near sundown, Orion's cheeks were flushed and his hands streaked with sap. He ran to the hearth, where she had started a stew that smelled of thyme and marrow bone. Your boy can swing a hammer straighter than most grown men, Varen said, unlacing his boots. He's had to learn early, she replied, stirring the pot. He said you used to sing him to sleep. She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. He told you that? He asked if I could sing too. I told him I don't know how. She sat beside him at the table, ladling stew into a bowl. I used to sing when I needed to keep fear quiet. Varen looked at her then, not with pity, but with something more solid. You don't have to quiet it anymore. Maybe not, she said. But I still remember the tune. Later that night, after Orion had fallen asleep curled against the quilt pile, Zachara stepped out onto the porch. Varen stood by the rail, oil lamp beside him, a rifle resting against the banister. You keeping watch for foxes? And anything else that doesn't belong? She wrapped her shawl tighter. You always sleep so little? He nodded. Old habit. She leaned beside him. The sky was wide and cold above them, stars sharp and endless. Your land feels like it's been waiting for something, she said. He didn't look away from the pasture. I've had it near 8 years. Built the house myself, added the barn 2 summers in. But it's felt hollow. You think it won't anymore? I think it stopped the day you sat at my table. Neither spoke after that. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of something slow and certain, like water filling a dry well. She didn't move when he reached for her hand and let his fingers close gently around hers. The next morning, Varen rode out before sunrise. Orion helped her gather hen eggs, his boots still too big. She stitched while he played, humming under her breath, and when the sun warmed the porch boards, she hung the dress in progress on the line to catch the light. By dusk, Varen returned with Caleb's brother, a broad-shouldered man with weathered skin and a voice like gravel warming in the sun. He said little, just tipped his hat, and asked where he should stand. 2 days later, with Orion holding her hand between them, Zachara and Varen stood beneath the cottonwood behind the barn. The preacher read from a small, worn Bible. No one else watched. Just the sky, the trees, and the prairie stretched wide and golden. When the vows were said, and Varen kissed her soft, steady, and without rush, Orion grinned so wide his eyes disappeared. That night, Varen carried her across the threshold not out of show, but because she had walked so far already and laid her hand against the timber wall he had built with his own 2 hands. "You're home now," he whispered. And she was. The ladder to the loft stayed and used after the wedding. Varen cleared the back room himself, moving the seed sacks and the broken yoke to the shed, then laying down a pine floor that creaked faintly under bare feet. Zachara hung the curtains she stitched from spare muslin, and Varen brought in a small iron stove from town so she wouldn't have to step into the cold just to boil water. Most mornings started with the hush of Orion's footsteps padding across the floorboards before first light. He'd crawl into their bed, press against Zachara's side, and fall asleep again, warm as bread under the quilt. Varen would rise quietly, stoke the fire, and let the light fall softly over the room before speaking a single word. One morning, Zachara stood at the edge of the pasture, her hem damp with dew, watching Orion crouched in the grass with a stick in one hand and a beetle in the other. Varen walked up behind her, wiping his hands on a rag. "I was thinking about building him a wagon. Something with wheels that turn proper." She smiled, eyes still on her son. "He'd pull that thing across the whole prairie if you let him." "I plan to. He's got legs like a deer." They stood in silence a moment, until she looked at him. "You always knew you wanted land." "I did," he said, "but I thought I'd fill it with cattle, not people." She turned back to the field. "I didn't think I'd ever want a home again." He didn't ask her to explain. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed her a folded piece of paper. "It came in the post. From the man who kept my father's tools after he passed. Says he's ready to send them along, if I want them." She unfolded the letter, reading the careful cursive. "You never said your father was a carpenter. He built coffins. In Missouri. Said the work never dried up, but it wasn't the kind of thing he'd want for me. Will you take them?" "I think I should. There's no shortage of things to fix." That night, when Orion fell asleep under a new patchwork quilt she'd pieced together from old shirts, Zachara trimmed the wick on the lantern and set it low. "I'd like to teach him to read," she said, folding the last of the laundry. Varen looked up from the harness he was mending. "He's curious enough. I'll need a primer. Something with letters big enough for his fingers to follow. I'll ask the storekeep next time I go in. He trades in books sometimes." She sat across from him, resting her chin against her palm. "I used to teach," she said, "before I married. A one-room school in Cowley County. I had 24 children and a stove that smoked even when it wasn't lit." He looked at her carefully. "You miss it?" "I miss the quiet of it. The rhythm of pencils scratching and pages turning. But not like I miss a person. More like you'd miss sunlight on a winter day." He nodded. "Then we'll bring it back." For him, at least. In late November, the parcel from Missouri arrived, bound in burlap and sealed with wax. Inside were tools worn smooth from use, a joiner's plane, a brace and bit, a folding rule with faded numbers. Varen held them like heirlooms, not possessions. He built Orion a wagon by the end of the week. The wheels turned straight, the corners sanded down so clean the boy could run his hand along the edge without catching a splinter. Zachara watched them from the porch. Orion pulled the wagon across the yard, then climbed in and shouted for another ride. Varen obliged, dragging him in wide circles until both were breathless with laughter. At supper, Orion fell asleep with his cheek against the table. Zachara lifted him gently, carrying him to bed. Varen stood in the doorway and watched her smooth the hair from the boy's forehead. "He's slept lighter since the snow started," she said. "I could hang a blanket over the window. Cut the draft some." She turned to him. "You notice everything, don't you?" "Not everything," he said. "Just what matters." She stepped close. The lamplight caught the edge of her cheek, coloring it gold. "You've given us more than I knew to hope for. Seems to me you've given just as much." She rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her. The house was quiet, the fire low, the boys safe in bed. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a lullaby. Varen pressed his lips to her temple. "You warm this place more than any fire ever could." She smiled into his shirt. Then I'll keep tending it every day. Winter lay ahead, but the walls were strong, the roof tight, and the hearts beneath it steady. They had weathered worse. Now, they would weather together. By mid-December, the wind came from the north, so sharp it shaved the bark from trees. The sky hung low over the prairie, thick with gray that never quite turned to snow. Inside the house, the warmth held steady, but the air outside carried a hush that made even the crows quiet. Zachara stood at the work table, stitching thread into a flannel shirt she was altering for Orion. The fabric had once belonged to Varen, but the elbows had worn through, so she'd cut it down and pieced new sleeves from the scraps in her basket. Her needle moved with precision, not haste. Varen stepped in from the shed, pulling his gloves off finger by finger. "You hear about the mail wagon?" She looked up. "What about it?" Driver turned back at Cimarron Creek. Said the drifts past there were too deep. Likely won't see post for a week, maybe more. She nodded, folding the shirt across her lap. "I'll save the ink then." He hung his coat by the door, walking over to the stove. "You writing someone?" Her eyes lingered on the stitches. "I started a letter to a woman I knew in Cowley. She kept the school records. I thought she might know what became of the children when the building burned. I didn't know it had. Lightning strike," she said. "Middle of the night. Took the bell tower first." Varen poured water into the kettle, setting it over the flame. "You ever think about teaching again?" "Not just Orion. I do, but not in town. I couldn't bear the closeness of it anymore. The way people stare when they think you've come from ruin." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "There's space here. Plenty of it. If you wanted to teach, we could build something." She set the shirt aside. "You do that. I'd do anything that brings your eyes back to life the way they just did." She didn't look away. "You always speak plain. I've never seen much use in dressing up the truth." A pause settled between them, not heavy, just real. She stood and crossed to him, pressing her hand lightly to his chest. "Then here's mine," she said. "I've stopped waking with fear in my throat. I've started waiting for your voice in the morning. I don't know when it happened, but I'm glad it did." He reached up, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "It happened the moment you let your hopes speak louder than your hurt." She leaned into his touch, quiet, steady. The kettle began to sing. That evening, Orion sat at the table, tongue between his teeth as he traced letters into a thin slate tablet Varen had traded for last week. The boy's brow furrowed as he formed each curve, slow and deliberate. Zachara watched him from the hearth. "He's trying to write his name." Varen sat beside the boy. "That a no?" Orion nodded. "Then R. But the R's hard." Varen picked up a bit of chalk and drew in her on the edge of the board. "Try again like this. Start from the top and make the leg strong." The boy gave it another go, then looked up. "Is it right?" Varen studied it. "It's honest. That counts." The boy grinned wide, then set the chalk down and leaned against his arm. Later, after Orion had gone to bed, Zachara sat brushing her hair by the firelight. Varen was mending a leather strap, but his eyes kept drifting to her reflection in the window pane. "You always wear it down at night," he said. "I used to braid it, but I like the way it feels free." He set the strap aside. "I've never known a woman who made stillness feel like a gift." She turned on the bench. "You think I'm still?" He nodded. "Still like a field before harvest. Alive under the surface." She crossed to him, curling beside him on the bench with her feet tucked under her skirt. "You make me feel like I was never broken, just waiting to be seen." He rested his forehead to hers. "You were never broken. You were just surviving. Now you get to live." Her fingers found his. "Then let's do it slow. No rush. Just the kind of days that leave you full when they end. No other kind I want." Outside, the wind curled against the eaves, but inside the house, the quiet was warm and pulsing, like the steady beat of something mended and growing. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The fire held, the walls stood firm, and the three of them slept under one roof, safe in the middle of the wide, wintering world. The snow came in March, late and heavy, burying the fence posts and muffling the world to a hush. Varen shoveled a path to the barn before dawn while Orion dozed beside the stove, wrapped in a quilt. Zachara stood at the window, watching the sky press low against the horizon. The land had vanished into white, and it felt like time itself had paused. Inside, the warmth held. She had begun teaching Orion arithmetic with smooth stones and a slate board, counting in small rows, then subtracting them. He picked up quickly, but it was the stories she told that made his eyes light. She started weaving them from memory, tales with wolves and wheat fields, kind ghosts and clever children. He listened with his whole face. That evening, as Varen brushed snow from his coat and hung it to dry, he caught the end of one of her stories. Orion sat cross-legged at her feet, mouth parted slightly. He got out. Varen asked once the boy had gone to bed. He did, Zachara said, stretching her legs toward the hearth. But only because he listened to his mother. Varen sat beside her. You ever think about writing them down? She looked over. I've thought about it. But paper's dear, and I'd need ink. I'll find both, he said. You've got something worth keeping. She shifted, her voice quiet but certain. I didn't think there'd be anything left of me after that winter. But now I wake each day with something to give. He reached for her hand. You give more than you know. The snow didn't relent for days. Varen strung a line between the house and barn so he wouldn't lose his way in the whiteout. Inside, Zachara baked bread with the last of the yeast, stretching meals with dried beans and root cellar apples. When the wind whistled through the chinks in the walls, Varen packed them with old feed sacks. On the 6th day, Orion woke with a cough that rattled. His cheeks flushed, and his breath came shallow. Zachara wrapped him in blankets and mixed honey into warm water, but by evening, his fever climbed. Varen came in from the barn, snow crusted in his beard, and saw her sitting on the bed with Orion curled against her. His skin's hot, she said, not looking up, and his breath's rough. Varen crouched, pressing the back of his hand to the boy's neck. There's a woman, Sarah Danette, 4 miles west. She kept her husband alive through last year's fever. Knows herbs better than most doctors. Zachara didn't hesitate. Go. He saddled the mare, not the draft horse, she was faster. The wind cut sharp, but he didn't pause, not even when the path vanished beneath snow. He rode west through drifts and dusk, the cold gnawing through his gloves. It was past full dark when he returned, Sarah riding behind him, her bag strapped to her back. She entered the house like she'd been born to it, setting her coat aside and kneeling beside Orion. Her hands were firm but gentle. She brewed something pungent, steeped in boiled nettle and elderflower, then fed it to him spoon by spoon. Zachara stood by, silent, eyes fixed on her son's face. He'll sleep now, Sarah said, rising. Keep him warm. He'll sweat through the fever. Zachara pressed her lips to Orion's hair. Thank you. Sarah nodded. He's strong. And he's got people who love him. That's half the fight. Varen rode her back through the snow without speaking. When he returned, Zachara was still sitting beside Orion, but the boy's breathing had eased. She looked up, her face drawn with exhaustion and relief. He's cooler, she whispered. Varen knelt beside her, placing one hand on her back. You did everything right. I was scared, she said. More than I've been in a long time. You didn't let it stop you. She leaned into him then. You came back. I always will. The snow melted slow that spring, but the ground softened early, and Orion's strength returned with the thaw. By April, he was chasing rabbits behind the barn again, his laughter clear in the air. Varen built a small shed at the edge of the property, a place for Zachara's stories. He fashioned shelves from pine, carved her name into the lintel. She filled the first notebook with tales of a boy who talked to crows and a girl who could hear trees speak. One morning, she stepped into the doorway of the shed, holding a page in her hand. This one's about a woman who thought her life was over. But it wasn't. It was just beginning. Varen looked up from the fence he was mending. Does she find what she needs? She finds more than that, Zachara said. She finds someone who sees her, and a place that holds her. He crossed the yard, wiping his hands on his trousers. You know what I see, every morning when I open my eyes. She didn't answer. I see the rest of my life, he said. And she's standing right in front of me. Her breath caught, just once, before she reached for him. They married with a bond that had already been forged, not in ceremony, but in what they'd built together quietly, steadily, like a house that never buckled under the wind. In time, Zachara wrote her stories in ink. Varen carved a second bench for the porch. Orion grew tall and strong, his letters neat and his voice sure. People came from nearby farms, bringing their children to learn from the woman with the gentle hands and the warm eyes. At night, after the lamps were turned down and the fire banked low, Varen would draw her close beneath the quilts. "This is what I hoped for," he'd whisper. And she'd say, "This is what I never let myself dream of, but it's mine now." And it was. Their home stood through every season that followed, not because it was made of timber and stone, but because it was made with care, with choice, and with the kind of love that does not ask for praise, only the chance to last.